This is an I Dream of Words short. Today we're going to be talking about two English idioms. Yes, that's right. This video we're looking at two idioms that convey the same idea but from different sides. No news is good news, and bad news travels fast. There's a common assumption in English-speaking cultures that if you're waiting for an outcome, and it could be either good or bad, it's good to hear nothing, so you will often hear that no news is good news. The reason for this is the other idiom. Good news is often very slow to travel person to person in Western societies, as people thrive on negative and hurtful gossip. Bad news, however, flows through the gossip network almost instantly, so the bad news does indeed travel fast. Usually the worse the news, the faster it moves. Let's take a look at an example. Have you heard back about whether you got the part? Not yet, but I'm afraid. Until I hear something, I'm sure I didn't. Remember, no news is good news. I hope you're right. Don't worry, if you didn't get it, everyone would be falling all over themselves to tell you and laugh at you for it. Bad news travels fast, right? Exactly, so chill, you've got this. I'm chill. Want an ice cream? Sure. In this example, B is waiting to hear back about a part in a play. They haven't heard anything, but are afraid they didn't get it. A comforts them with the notion that no news is good news, that if you hear nothing, it's almost the same as getting a positive result. B isn't sure, so A reminds them that people love to share hurtful news, and that if it hasn't happened, it's probably good, since only bad news travels fast. A encourages B to chill, to relax, and B makes a joke about food that is literally chilled, frozen, like ice cream, which turns into a tasty friend date. These idioms definitely don't mean the same thing, and you can't just swap one out for the other. But they convey two different truths about English-speaking culture, perhaps about Western culture in general. There's a great German word that has been adopted in English to describe the idea: Schadenfreude. Literally, that would be darkness-loving, but to give it a better translation, it's people taking pleasure from other people suffering or getting hurt. Some people think it's a natural part of being human, but really it's just a consequence of a negative gossip-driven culture that has become more and more dominant in the past few generations in predominantly English-speaking parts of the world. Sadly, it appears this has become a highly successful export from the West to other places too. Sociology lesson aside, however, let's look at these two idioms separately. No news is good news. This equates the idea that you haven't heard anything at all with the fact that the outcome will be positive. Of course, this is completely lacking in logic and makes no sense. It is, however, something that is often true. If you apply for a job, it might take weeks or months to hear if you've got an interview, but you will often hear in a few days that you've been rejected. No news, in this case, is definitely good news. The longer you go without hearing, the more likely it is that you're still being considered, since you haven't been completely rejected yet. Similarly, if you're worried you're going to become sick from having been around someone else with the flu, the longer you go without symptoms, the more chance there is you're not sick, that the outcome will be positive. In this case, too, no news from your body telling you to go to bed and spend a week miserable is most certainly good news. Many activities are linked to negative feedback. The longer they go on, the more likely it is the result will be positive. The most obvious is pregnancy. If you're trying to have a baby, bleeding would be negative feedback. That you have been unsuccessful trying to conceive. You don't know if you'll start bleeding tomorrow, but the fact that you didn't today prolongs the idea that you might have succeeded. News from people, though, is probably the best example. That's where the other idiom comes in. Bad news travels fast. Sometimes you'll hear this with only stuck in front of it, but that's not always part of the idiom. English speakers tend to be extremely focused on spreading hate and gossip about each other, especially, it appears, oddly enough, about their friends. Unlike many of the other idioms in English, this one is actually a pretty literal statement. Bad news does travel quickly. The reason is simple. People like to wallow in the pain of others, Schadenfreude, as we have already discussed. So if you think something might have gone wrong, you really only have to wait a short time before you'll hear it. If you don't hear, it probably didn't go wrong, because people don't seem to be able to restrain themselves from spreading bad news. The more secret or hurtful, the faster it travels. In this case, as we have seen, no news is definitely good news. So when you're waiting for an answer, and you're afraid something might have gone wrong, or that the outcome might not be positive, don't be surprised if your friends remind you that no news is good news, because bad news travels fast. Thanks for taking the time to join me here today for an I Dream of Words short. See you next time.